Hello, hi everybody. Teacher Weilun here, and thanks for coming in today for our this session on choosing your secondary three subject combination. So today, actually, what we are going to do is we are hoping to actually give you all some insights in terms of the choosing of the subjects at the secondary three level, and maybe just to keep things interactive a bit, we can also just take a look. You all can raise your virtual hand, right? How many of you here actually are secondary two students, right? So secondary two students in the crowd, you can raise your virtual hand, right? And then we can take a look at that. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I see a couple. Okay, secondary two should be the most lah, right? So the thing is that this particular webinar, I would say, is probably the most applicable for the secondary two because as you all finish your Sec 2 exams, as you go into Sec 3, you all will be choosing your subject combinations for Sec 3. So that's what we are looking at. But I know also some of you will also want to have a bit of a heads up. So maybe some of you here are at the Sec 1 or Sec I don't think there are any primary school students here, but I can ask later. But are there any Sec 1 students? You can also raise your hand. Any Sec 1 students? Okay, I think there's a number as well, right? So secondary one students, okay? So secondary one, I think it's also good to already have a head start on this, okay? So with that, I'm going to go into the session proper. So let me also, just introduce myself. I'm teacher Weilun here. I'm the academic director here at MyStretcher. And as some of you may be aware, actually MyStretcher is a tuition and education center here in Singapore that caters for pre-primary, primary, and secondary tuition and enrichment services across the island. And one of our huge crowd here really is with regards to the secondary students. And you all will also know actually in the last couple of years, just in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a lot of changes, particularly at the secondary level, be it for the students who are entering into Sec 1 and also students who exited secondary school to go to JC and then to go to uni. There are actually a lot of changes that would directly impact and have implications on something like this, the Sec 3 subject combination. So today what we are going to do is I'm going to be touching a bit on some of these key developments, some of these key changes, what they would mean for all of you, and also in terms of the kind of considerations that we need to keep at the back of our mind as we go about choosing our subject combinations, right? So that's the thing that I would touch more on today. And to keep things interactive, anytime that you all have any questions, feel free to just type it in the chat and I'll be happy to take them live as well. So we can keep the session interactive and you can just type the sessions in the chat and then I'll take it from there. Okay, can? Yeah, so as what I've asked just now, I think there's quite a good group across different levels. So different of you may have different considerations, right, at this time. So feel free to keep the questions coming, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just toggle over to the slide mode as well, okay? So that you are able to see the slide. Okay, just give me a minute. Okay. Okay, let me toggle this over. Can. Okay, so now the first thing, right? So all of you here, I think first and foremost on your mind is really with regards to the Sec 3 subject placement exercise and why is it important. So perhaps also just to give a bit of a context, right? This Sec 3 subject placement, actually a while back, if you just look at it a couple of years back, the way they term it actually is they call it as like a Sec 2 streaming exercise. And you will see that actually the way they talk about it in the past, right, is that when we think about the concept of streaming, is really about putting people in kind of different baskets, right? Different categories. But as time goes by, together with some of the new initiatives like on, subject-based banding and everything, you also see that actually some of the terminology and lingo have changed. So instead of say like, subject streaming, now we look at it in terms of subject placement. And the idea here is that, the students themselves are the one really choosing the subject combinations, right? The subjects that best work for them, right? So that's why now if you look at it as you go from Sec 2, so that's the juncture where it happens. So after you finish your Sec 2 end of year exams, right, you will make the choice of the subjects that you want to take as you go into secondary 3, right? So that's how we think about this here. Okay. Okay, hang on a minute. My screen is blank, is it? Okay, hang on, let me just check. Oh, okay. So is it still blank now? Let me see. I
Yeah,
think
I
should be
cannot see
okay.
anything.
Oh, I see. Okay, just give me a minute. Outside cannot see. Oh, I see. Okay, give me a minute. Sorry about that. But you can see from my screen though. You seeing that one, right? Uh-huh. Oh, the share screen is black. Oh, I see. Okay, give me a minute. Sorry guys. I know y'all can't see the screen. Just let me check that out. Hmm? Why? Let me see. Is it sharing?
It's showing now.
Now it's okay, right? Okay, can. Yeah, can. Thanks. Okay, thanks. Sorry, everybody, for the technical error. Okay, so now coming back to this, right? I was just setting out the context for the Sec 3 subject placement and why is it important? I think that's the part that I want to highlight as a very key message for today because as a lot of you would know, some of you may even have briefings on this earlier in the year and you all will be having some briefings on this like, in a couple of days time, right? But what's the most important part? And this is something that, maybe schools will also place less of a focus on is really what is the importance of this exercise. And if you look at it here, right, like this in terms of the subject placement, right, maybe I can put it in the chat also, and then you all can just type, right? You all can just type in the chat. Why is this choosing of subjects important? What do you all think about that? Why is it important to the student, right, that they choose the right subjects at the Sec 3 level? Maybe you all can type in the chat and then we can take it from there just to see, what's the perspectives that you all had, be it whether you all are students or whether you are parents, right, helping your child along the way. What is the importance of this exercise and why is it important to, because it's only Sec 3, right? So it seems like, actually it's still quite far away from anything, right? So I'm only at Sec 3, quite far away from like JC, post-secondary, or even university. So why is it so important that I choose the right subject combination, right? So maybe for all the students here, you all can type in the chat, right? What are your quick thoughts? Don't even need like full sentences. Maybe just like 1 or 2 words will do, right? So what is the thought that come to your mind? Why is it important, right? So you all can type in the chat and then I can see it from there, right? To see whether there's anything, okay? Yeah, okay. So the thing to note, so I think some people are also saying, so essentially it is important because it determines your future, right? Your future, right? There is impact in terms of your, studies at uni, post-secondary, and even in terms of your career. And all these are not wrong. So actually, if you look at it, right, the important message here to take away is that we need to work backwards, right? So what you do here, right, actually, if you look at your choice of subjects at Sec 3, it will determine what you will study when you go to post-secondary. That means when you go to JC, when you go to poly, it will determine that. And then finally, when you go to the final level, which is your career, right, and your uni level, it will also determine what you can study there and in fact what you eventually work as. So that's the whole consideration that if you work backwards from there, right, what you want to do in future is going to be to some extent determined by what you're going to study at uni. What you're going to study at uni is determined by what you will study at JC or poly. And that in turn is also determined by what subjects you are picking right now at Sec 3. So what I would say that, it's not like, high stakes. There are going to be some implications that we have to be mindful of, right? And that is the one of the key message that I want to bring across today that as we think about our subjects, it is important for us to take note, particularly, in terms of our interest in certain subjects, in terms of some of our future inclinations when it comes to the career or the jobs that we want to do. Okay? Can? Okay? Can, so let me see that. Okay? So let's look at the next slide. Okay? So the next slide here, okay, is with regards to the allocation of subjects, right? So allocation of subjects, right? You can see over here, there are several things that we look at, right? When you look at school, because you may wonder, right? There are different students, right? Many of you here, right? Let's say there are many of you in a school. You all have different preference, right? When it comes to the subject that you can choose, right? So when you look at the subject that you can choose, right? How do we determine whether you get the subject that you want or not? So usually if you look at it in school, how is it that we actually allocate? How does a school allocate the subjects to the students is really dependent on three main criteria. So number one is really in terms of your academic performance. And when I say academic performance, right, they will really look at both your overall performance for the year in Sec 2 and also in terms of your subject specific performance. And later on, I will show you an example. But what it means by subject specific performance is that the subject specific performance sometimes is a prerequisite for certain subjects. For example, if you want to take, say, like additional mathematics in Sec 3, some schools actually will have certain requirement from your Sec 2 results for you to be able to take that subject. But this will be school specific. So later I will show you some example of what this will look like. Okay, so this is the first part. Second part, of course, is really dependent on, if you look at the logistics and the constraints in schools themselves. Because ultimately, if you look at the school, be it in terms of timetabling, be it in terms of schedule, the resources available, there are usually that many classes available for certain subjects. So it may be the case that, dependent on that, there may be, number of, applicants that, can sign up for certain subject combinations, right? And in fact, if you see for certain schools, there may even be certain combinations or certain subjects that they do not offer actually. So that's also going to be something that you have to be mindful of. And that one actually your school will make very clear. So your school, right, in terms of the briefing that they will do, they will also let you know, right, in terms of what are the subjects that you can choose and so forth, right? So that's the part. In particular, I would say generally for the key subjects, they aren't going to be that big a difference. So that means in terms of the core subjects and all, they will definitely offer. But what could be the difference is, for example, right, in terms of like maybe combined science, they may not offer all three types, right? So the physics chem bio, and physics bio, they may not offer all three. So it may depend on the school. And some schools also, depending on the availability of resources, they may not also offer certain humanities specifically in terms of literature and so on. So these are really school specific, right? So that's the second part. The third part is the student's preference. So the student's preference here, you can see this is with regards to your choice, right? So you are going to be able to make the choices, and typically for schools, right, there are going to be different combination that you can pick. So based on your preference, based on your choice order, that's where the school will also allocate in terms of the subject combination to you. Okay, so that's the next part to take note. And from there, if you just take a brief look at the timeline, what does that look like in terms of the timeline? Generally, where all of you are at now is you are at the end of the year exams finished already, right? So I think most of you will have finished your exam. Some schools maybe straddle a bit into early next week, but generally by this week or early next week, actually you all will have finished your exams already. And what you can look forward to, right? I hope, right, is the mid-October getting back the results, right? And usually what happens from there is the school will also time that with the briefing to all of you. And usually this happens across many points in time. So for the benefit of some of you students and parents who are at the lower sec, so sec 1 level instead of sec 2, some of these briefings with regards to subject selection, they would kind of put it across the year. So usually what they do is they will have one near the start of the year. That's one. Then the other one, they will time it for the end of the year after they have finished the exams, right? So that will be another briefing. So most of you should have that. Then after that, usually what happens is towards the middle to end October, that's where you'll be required to submit, right, online, the options, right, of your subjects that you want to pick, right? So that will happen around the end October period. That will be the key milestone that you all have to take note of, where you all can submit that request, right, for the subject combination. Typically around early November is where they will release your subject placement. So they will tell you, okay, this is what you pick and this is what you have, right? And look, going to Sec 3, this is what you can expect. There is going to be usually an appeal process that's allowed for, right? So in schools, generally, they make allowance for that. That means if you look at your subjects, you feel like you're not quite happy with what you got, right? You feel like, you do want to get this subject, but you didn't get that, you can actually appeal, right? And the appeal process usually happens around the early November period. Then by middle November to late November, that is where that is confirmed, and everything will be confirmed from there, right? So that means more or less your outcome will be locked in end November, because they also need time to prep, get the classes ready for the new academic year, right? But that is the timeline that we are looking at. And right now, actually, you all are at the end, right? So most of you will have finished the exams, and it will be a good time actually now to start to really think about this in a lot of detail as to what are the options available to you and how should you think about the subjects that you want to take, right? Hence, I think today we also cover a bit of that, right? Some of the implications and some of the new developments that you all should be mindful of as well. Okay? Can? Okay, so this is what I was saying just now. So if you look at this here, right? These are what we call as examples of requirements that you would see some schools have. So I would say that this varies from school to school. So what I mean by that is that you see what I wrote here on this slide, right? To caveat, it's not like every school is like that. So it's not to say, oh, I look at this slide, A maths, every school you must get B4 or better in your Sec 2 mathematics to get into A maths in Sec 3. It's not like that. Different schools will have different requirements, right? How do they set that? Number one, it could depend, number one, on the track record of the school. Number two, it can depend on the profile and the strength of the students within the school. Number three, also, it can depend on the past results of the students and all as well. So there are many different factors that can affect the kind of threshold that they set in terms of the subjects that they grant. But what I'm trying to get across here is that just to show you a few examples, and these are actual examples drawn from different schools to show you what are some of these examples of thresholds and criterion for you to take certain subject, right? And generally, you see the one at the top, right, is what we call as a general common academic requirement. So this one, I would say, is generally how we look at it in terms of just promoting from Sec 2 to Sec 3 and being able to take if you look at this particular case, right, so this common academic requirement was from one particular school where they said you have to attain an overall mark of at least 50% in English and two subjects, or at least half the total number of examinable subjects offered. So this one, again, just to caveat, is not across schools, but I'm just taking one example from one school to show you an example of a broad cross-cutting criteria that they have put in place, right? So this is something that they expect of their students if they were to, take on all G3 related subjects at Sec 3. So that's the first part. The next part below is you can see are what we call as the subject-specific requirement. So subject-specific means if you want to take that particular subject in Sec 3, this is the requirement that you need to meet. So this is, again, another example from another school. So you can see in that particular school, right? Like for example, I want to call your attention to some of the subjects that are very notable, like the pure sciences. So some of these will be at the back of your mind, right? So pure sciences are your pure physics, pure chemistry, pure biology. For many of you right now, you wouldn't really know that in this format, because for many of you here in the Sec 1 and the Sec 2 batches, you will just know it more generally as science, right? Where all these different topics across subjects are mixed together. But once you go to the Sec 3 and Sec 4 level, you will see that science itself is split into three pure areas. One is what we call as pure physics, one is pure chem, and one is pure biology, right? So specifically, physics look at things like light, motion, forces, etc. Chemistry looks at how different things interact together, right? Chemical compounds, elements, atoms, molecules. And biology really looks at and the animals, plants, all the things that we learn about transport, digestive system, etc., etc. So it's a lot of things that you have already done, right? The things I talk about, you are kind of familiar at Sec 1 and Sec 2. But what happens here is that they will further divide it into these three areas, and then there will be a deeper dive into each of them. Okay? And there's also something called the combined sciences. So later I will talk about that a bit. This is usually some of the key things that you often see people ask, right? So pure versus combined, which one should we take? So later I will talk about that. The other very notable one is math and A math, right? So hot question, right, is do I need to take A math, right? A math is additional mathematics, which I will talk more about later. But the main takeaway here is you see for some schools, when they have A math, you will see that actually they do require a certain requirement, score requirement from secondary two, right? And secondary two, you can see the requirement here is B4 or better. Okay, B4 or better. So you can see B4 or better in mathematics lah, because at Sec 2 they never do A math yet, so they only do math. So B4 or better in mathematics, then they can take A math. It differs from school to school. So for some schools, right, it's not like that. Some schools, what they do is the criteria is different. So instead of B4, they set it at 55%. That's another variation that you see. Some schools you will see a bit different. Some schools, they just by default say the student will have to do A math. If the student was doing all G3 level subjects in Sec 2, by default, right, the student will have to do A math as one of the subjects in Sec 3. That is also another possible variant. So this kind of practices, right, it will be dependent on schools, right? It will be dependent on schools itself. And here, before I show you some actual examples from schools, so that you all can get a feel of that. In particular, I think for those of you who may not have gone through the briefing yet, it will give you a sense of what exactly are these combinations that we are looking at. I want to give you a kind of stylized example also so that you can appreciate it better. This is what it kind of looks like, right? So essentially, if you look at it, right, generally, when you look at your subject combination, you can think of it as there are going to be this stable core of subjects that is a must do, right? And what are these must do? It's essentially made up of the two languages, one mathematics subject, one science, and one humanities. Okay? And then the others will be what we loosely more characterize as electives. And generally, these electives will be these additional 1 to 3 subjects that students will take. So to the question, right? So exactly how many subjects do we take now? And the parents here may be wondering as well, right? Things have changed a bit. So in the past, you can see, right? In the past, lah, right? And also even during my time, we can take, quite a number of subjects. In fact, some of us took as many as, 9, or some even it's possible up to 10 subjects. But right now it's no longer the case already. And you can see because of some of the developments that I will highlight later, particularly with regards to Sec 4 O-level scoring, it has changed already. There is now a direction trending towards lesser subjects, taking lesser subjects. And generally what we are looking at is between 6 to 8. And in fact, 8 is already on the upper end already. So generally for students who are taking the G3 level subjects, right, many of them actually are looking at it in terms of 7, right? So if you more or less broadly and loosely characterize it, generally for schools, G3 level will be taking 7, and G1 to G2 will be 6. And if you look at what is the minimum requirement for that consideration to post-secondary, particularly when it comes to the JC level, that will be 5. But 5 is cutting it a bit too dangerous because 5 is really the minimum. So that's why usually we work with like a 6, then 7 is 1 up, and 8 will be kind of like the upper border already of what schools will get students to go. And you can see that that's kind of like a bit less compared to last time, right? Where you think about it as the upper limit, I thought was more about a 9. The reason for that is because there has been a bit of a change nowadays in terms of the scoring. So in the past, right, I think for the parents here as well, you are very familiar with the L1 R5 system, right? L1 R5. It's no longer L1 R5. In going into the 2028 joint admissions exercise, which actually affects all the students here, it will be changed to a L1 R4 system, right? So for those of you here who are Sec 2 and below, it will directly impact you because you all will be taking the very first year of the 2027, what we call as the SEC examination, right? And then you all will be taking part in the 2028 joint admissions exercise. So with regards to the joint admissions exercise in 2028, there is going to be a big change, which is instead of a L1 R5, we are looking at the L1 R4. And maybe what I'll do is I'll take the chance to highlight that to everybody first to put that context across, so that it's familiar to you. This is something that maybe some schools won't even touch on that much, but it is important actually, because if you look at these developments, it's precisely these developments that are driving the changes at the subject selection actually. So I will go on to that first so that you all can take a look. And you also from there can get a sense that, and this is the message that I want to drive home here also, that your exam results and the selection, in particular, of course, the exam results you cannot control already, just leave it. But the selection of the subjects is an important decision because it can affect you for the next, not just the next 2 years, but the next 7 to 8 years, because it will extend on into your post-secondary, it will extend on into your university, and then thereafter what you can do generally, right? So that's the important takeaway here. And from there, that's why I want to let you all know right now actually how things have changed um, when you go to the O levels, how things will change when you go to JC and then beyond, so that you can appreciate how that cascades down as well. So just now I talked quite a bit about this joint admissions exercise, right? So I think it will be a good time to let you all know. So what exactly is a joint admissions exercise? Joint admissions, I'm sure for all of you, you all are all familiar with the Sec 1 posting, correct? You all are all familiar with Sec 1 posting. You all have been through that because all of you have done the PSLE. So what do you all do when you all go through Sec 1 posting, right? You all pick your schools and then you all get posted to a secondary school, correct? So here, what I mentioned by the joint admissions, you can think of it as is the equivalent of that Sec 1 posting exercise, except that it happens uh, after secondary school and is about you getting to be it JC, Polytechnic, or Institutes of Technical Education. So it's like the equivalent of the Sec 1 posting, just that now this is for post-secondary. You can think of it that way, right? And the thing that I was highlighting here is that there has been quite a big change, right? A big change, and for all the people here, it will affect you all. What is the change here? The change here is like that, right? So coming with effect from the 2027 exam, the 2027 exam will no longer be termed as the O-level exam, but rather is termed as the SEC examination, right? The Singapore Cambridge Secondary Education Examinations, which is actually, if you look at this here, right? For those of you, I don't think you'll be unfamiliar with this, because if I were to go through all that, it will be uh, too long already. But I have to assume that many of you here would already be familiar with subject-based banding, because you all are all in secondary school. You all will now know about the G1, G2, and G3, correct? So that part I think you all will know. So I won't belabor that too much. But just to give a quick summary, G1, G2, and G3, these have now replaced the normal technical, normal academic, and the express stream, right? So there's no more normal technical, normal academic, no more express. And instead of students being put in different buckets like that, what happens now is that students have the ability to choose different combination of subjects based on their ability. So if they feel that they're pretty strong at certain subjects, they can take it at the G3 level, which is the highest ability level. Whereas for students who maybe are less confident in a certain subject, they can then take it at the lower level, which is the G2 level, right? So there is this mix and match, and that is the whole artifact of subject-based banding. So I won't go into that in detail because that's like another entire development on its own, but I think you all should be all familiar with that because you all have been through the entire new system already. In fact, I think some of you here may have been the first P6 batch that we briefed 2 years ago, right? When we talk about subject-based banding. So you all are now in it, and you all will be also, taking that 2027 first SEC exam, and then going through the 2028 joint admission. So what has changed in the 2028 admission is two things. It's no longer L1, R5, right? It's rather it's L1, R4, and it must not exceed 16. So some of you may be wondering, okay, but teacher, what's L1, R4 and everything? I'm not that familiar with that yet. So I'm going to touch a bit on that as well, okay? So what you all need to recognize here is that essentially L1, R4 is a way of computing of your scores. So think of it as, when you came from primary school, we had the concept of AL score, right? And the AL score fits into a total score that you get, and then that determines which secondary school you can go. It's pretty much the same concept here, actually. So over here, it's just that instead of AL, now we look at it in terms of L1, R4, right? And what's L1, R4? As the name suggests, L1 is a language, L for language. So one subject will be counted from the language. Then R4 is your four other relevant subjects. And what are these four other relevant subjects? If you look at this page here, I've set that out. The four relevant subjects is one from humanities. Humanities means like your history, geography, literature, or even like SS, social studies, history, social studies, literature, etc. Another R2 will be from math or science, right? So your math, your A math, your physics, chem, bio, combined science. R3 is from either humans, mathematics, or science. And finally, R4 is any remaining subject that is your best scoring. So you can look at it this way, right? So in short, you can see many of you here by the time you go to Sec 3 and by the time you prepare for your Sec 4 exams, you will be taking a total of probably between 6 to 8 subjects about there. So what's going to happen is that from that 6 to 8 subjects, you are going to draw out these 5 subjects. And these 5 subjects will count towards your score to determine your entry into post-secondary, right? So whether you go to JC, whether you go to Poly or ITE. And you can see from here, right? So it's similar to PSLE in the sense that the lower your score, the better. That means the lower your overall score that you get, the better it is for entry, right? So sorry, here there's a bit of a typo, okay? So this is not L1 R5, here should also be L1 R4. So just recall that, right? That is the big change. So what happens in the past, right, guys, is that we do it as L1 R5. That means they will consider 6 subjects. But the big change for all of you here is that instead of L1 R5, now we are doing it as L1 R4. Only consider 5 subjects only. And why is that such a big change? Is because it's part of MOE's consideration that, by putting away one subject, there is now more bandwidth actually for the student. The way they tabulate, and you will see this timing being thrown around quite a bit, that generally every one subject that we add on is 3 more hours of curriculum time per week. 3 more hours of curriculum time. And that's just factoring in the class time, not factoring in your time doing study and homework at home. So I'll say realistically, if you look at it, if you add in the timing doing homework and study at home and prep, it probably adds up to ×2. It's probably about 6 hours more. So by taking away one subject in that sense, right, from L1 R5 to L1 R4, is freeing up the time actually. So that time that's freed up makes students less stressed, give them more time to explore other things, right? For example, CCA, other interest areas and all that as well. So that's really part of that, move towards that. And I think it's a welcome development. But you can see here that then there are some implications. And one of the very direct implications is also in terms of the overall number of subjects that they will actually pick to do at the Sec 3 level and then subsequently preparing for the Sec 4 as well, right? But you see some things that don't change is what? What don't change is the fact that, there are certain core subjects that is a must do and you must perform well, right, in order to do well for your R1, R4. And what are those, right? So that one language, the one humanities, the one math/science, and then the one humanities, math, or science, right? So those are still core in that sense, right? So that is how we look at it here, okay? And here, right, the interesting thing is you can see we have spelled it out very clearly, right? This is for the determination for going towards JC, in case I wasn't clear just now. So this particular L1 R4 system, calculation-wise, is if you want to go to junior college, that is the score that we'll use, right? That is the score that we'll use. So the way to think about it is, let's say you want to go to junior college. So what's going to happen is that I will be using this L1 R4 and I'll use it to tally your score. But the requirement here is, you see guys, it will only be drawing from your G3 subject. So some of you may already be wondering, right? Because nowadays your child may be taking a mix of G3 and G2. So you may be thinking in your head, okay, my child takes some G2, does that count towards the L1 R4 computation? Should he still want to go to JC? The answer is no, right? If you have G2, G2 does not count towards the L1 R4 computation. L1 R4 computation is purely based on the G3 subjects. So to be very clear, right, that means if you want to go to JC, mathematically speaking, you need to maintain that 5 G3 subjects, right? Because that is what will count towards the L1 R4 calculation, right? So that's the way to think about this, okay? So that's one thing that I already want to highlight to all of you, that direct implication actually, right? And that's why people always say, right? So what is the minimum, right? The minimum is that 5. But 5 subject is actually very risky because if you think about it, if you just take 5 subject, it's theoretically possible, but and for some of the students also, they do ultimately just go down to 5. But 5 is as thin as you can cut it already, right? Because if you look at the L1R4 calculation, that means you must include every single one. That means you cannot screw up anyone, right? In that sense, okay? So that's for that. And you can see over here, also just to let you all know, right? So going to JC, junior college, there are also specific requirements for different subjects. So it's not just the overall score. So you can see here, like what I said just now, right? For overall score L1, R4, it cannot exceed 16. So if you exceed 16, you cannot go to JC, actually. Then the other one is they must also meet specific grade requirement for certain subjects. And what are those subjects? Those subjects is for English, mathematics, and mother tongue. So for English, it must be A1 to C6. And that is always the tricky part. So you will hear some students where they do very well for like their math, sciences, and all that, right? But somehow they fumble on their English. And like say, for example, they fail. And it's very tricky, you know, because if there's fail, there is implication. Like you can see right here, right? That means they didn't meet the requirement. And if they didn't meet the requirement, does it mean they can't go to JC? Not quite. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen later, right? But there's some conditional thing that can happen, but the student will have to fulfill those conditions before they can before they can continue to stay on in JC. So you all can see over here, math also the same. So math A1 to D7. So if you get like E8 or something, then there will be a complication again, right? Okay, and what's the complication? The complication here is this, right? The complication here is that if you don't meet, you can still go in. So let's say, for example, your overall score is good enough to get into the JC, but it just so happens that some of your subjects are not that strong and you don't meet the subject-based requirement. So what will happen from that is that the school can still let you enter into the JC conditionally, but there is a requirement for that. So what's the requirement for that? The requirement for that, guys, is that they will let you go into JC conditionally, right? But at the end of the first year of JC, you need to retake that subject. So say for example, maybe for math, you didn't meet the requirement, right? Because the requirement was D7, but maybe you got F9, right? So what's going to happen is that your other subjects were fine. Your overall L1, R4 was good enough to go into the school. Then they will say, okay, you can come in, but at the end of J1, I need you to retake your O-level math. And you need to meet the requirement of the D7, right? And if you don't meet, then you will be out of the JC already. So that is the requirement that you have to meet, okay? So that is what we mean by conditional requirement, okay? Conditional requirement. Okay, I think there's a question on whether we are sharing this deck of slide. We won't be sharing the deck of slide itself as is, but what's going to happen is that after this webinar, this whole webinar will be recorded as a video that we'll put onto our YouTube so that you all can refer to it at your own time too. So the YouTube itself will also then feature the materials that I'm going through right now. Okay, so that's the response to the question. Okay, some of you may also ask here, right, that how come there's this thing called MI? MI. So maybe, does anybody here know what's MI? You all see here, right? So there's JC, there's MI. What does MI mean? Okay, and you will see here actually, right? Why am I talking so much about this also is that there is direct implication, right? You will see here, whatever that's going to happen at the Sec 4 level, it's not too far away from where you are at right now actually. Because you see, whatever subjects that you are picking for Sec 3 essentially determines whatever that's counted for your L1, R4, and that essentially determines your entry into JC and MI, right? And what's MI? MI is what we call as Millennial Institute, right? So essentially for MI itself, you will see that it's quite an interesting case whereby Millennial Institute works a bit like JC. The only difference is that while JC is 2 years, Millennial Institute is 3 years. So that means for post-secondary, you will study there for 3 years. And you will see here for the Millennial Institute, essentially they are covering the same content as what you would do at JC. It's just that they spread it out more, right? So instead of 2 years, you have 3 years. So the pace is a bit slower and a bit more manageable for students who prefer that kind of pace. So that is Millennial. And you can see here, understandably, then you see their L1 R4 requirement is lower when you compare it to JC. Because you see JC, the minimum is 16. But MI, Millennial Institute, is 20. So you can get an overall higher L1 R4 and you can still go to Millennial Institute, right? So, but generally we kind of cluster Millennial together with the JC because their curriculum is more or less the same. It's just that for Millennium Institute, it's a longer runway, 3 years to complete your education as compared to 2 years for JC. Okay, but because of that, you see the pace is slower and the requirement for entering Millennium Institute is also lower. Okay, so that's how we think about it. Okay, yeah, and you will see from there, right? So essentially, whatever subjects that you choose now, right? The way to think about it is like that, right? So whatever subjects that you choose now, the idea is of those subjects that you choose, the L1 R4 will be picked from there, and that will determine your entry into JC and MI after that. Okay, so that's how we think about it. So that is the first implication already, right? And in short, if you look at it that way, one thought that could come to your mind is that, are there subjects generally that you are better at compared to others, right? Are there subjects that you are just really weak at and you now have a chance not to take it? Because that's the idea, right? So the idea is that if there's a subject that you are really weak at and you choose to continue to take it, there would be a impact, right? When you go to the Sec 3 and the Sec 4 level, because then that would mean one less subject actually that you can fall back on to count towards your L1 R4, right? L1 R4, okay? For those of you who are very perceptive, you may also recognize, right, that, this idea of bonus points. And I think that's something that even in school, when you go for your CCAs, your seniors, your teachers may have talked about that. So indeed, the CCA, the bonus system still holds. And what's the bonus system? You can think of it this way, right? So the L1 R4 gives you an overall score that you have. Say, for example, from L1 R4, based on all the subjects I got like 10 points, 10 points, okay? So the idea is the lower the points, the better. Right? The lower the points that you have, the more competitive the school that you can get into. So what happens is now there's this idea of these bonus points. And what these bonus points can do is they can further lower your score further so that your overall net, what we call as the net score, is as low as possible. And how do we get bonus points? There are usually about 3 routes to get that. The first route, and actually there's nothing too much that you can do for now already, because why I say that is because most, if not all of you, Sec 1 probably still possible, but if you are Sec 2 and beyond, it's probably more or less fixed already, right? So you have joined the CCAs that you need to join. You are already on certain trajectory and all that as well. But what's going to happen is depending on what you get from a CCA, if you get an excellence performance, you will get 2 bonus points. But if you get a good performance, you get 1. So how does it work? So 2 bonus points means, let's say my raw, what I call is my raw score from L1 R4 is 10 points. I can actually minus 2 from it. So I get 8. So you see it's lower, right? So 8, then I'm in a better spot compared to somebody who say doesn't have bonus points from CCA. So that is how we look at this, okay? And other than CCA, there are also other sources of bonus points. So what are those? If you take higher Chinese, higher mother tongue, and you get between A1 to C6, there's also another bonus points here that you will get. You will get 2 bonus points. And if you have an affiliated JC, that means, let's say, some schools, secondary is affiliated to the JC, right? There is also bonus points, right? A 2-point bonus. But you see, so guys, you may wonder, right? So if there's so many bonus points, does it mean then if I keep minusing my points, I can, don't need to depend on my study already, right? I can just keep minusing all these points. But the reality is not that, because there's a maximum of points you can get for bonus. They can only get a maximum of 3 bonus only. Which means that you can only minus 3. You cannot like, you count here, wow, teacher, does it mean I can minus 11? No, there's a cap, and the cap is 3 bonus points. So you can only minus 3. Last time, so again, this is another change, okay? Last time you used to be able to minus 4. Last time, the maximum bonus points for your seniors actually is 4 points. But again, now it's only 3. Why 3? Because you just look at it, again, it's mathematics. L1 R4, right? L1 R4 instead of L1 R5, that means your overall score already come down already. So if they give you so many bonus points, then the impact of the bonus points will become too large, right? So as they lower the L1 R4, they also have to simultaneously lower the bonus point. You see? So that's what they're doing here, right? So the bonus points now lower from 4 to 3. Okay? So that's how we think about it. Some of you may also be thinking, okay, but maybe teacher, I don't really want to go to JC. I'm also thinking about poly. So if you are interested in that, the poly route itself is a different kind of computation. So I will also highlight a little bit on that and how that has also changed, right? In view of some of the developments I mentioned, in view of subject-based banding, how has that changed also? So this one also a bit different compared to your seniors really. So just now I talked about JC, right? JC quite different, L1, R4, you know, 3 bonus points or that. Now poly also a bit different. So poly, you can see what happens now is because of subject-based banding, right? One of your subject for polytechnic, right? When you count towards the polytechnic scoring, you can offer it at the G2 level. So that is where they allow for G2. So you see just now for JC don't have, right? JC is all G3. But poly, they make allowance for one subject to be offered at G2 level. So here is, you see, so that's the thought process here, right? So thought process is, okay, so I want to go to, if I want to go to JC, when I choose my subjects at Sec 3, Sec 4, I need to make sure that I have enough G3 subjects to count towards L1, R4. That's my thought process. But if I want to go to poly, then it's okay for one of them to be at the G2 level. In fact, you see what's the common benchmark? The common benchmark is on the basis of 4 G3 and 1 G2 subject. Okay, and the way they calculate this is a bit different from the JC one. So JC one, remember just now I talked about L1, R4, right? Poly is a bit different in that poly, you see, the wording is a bit like interesting, right? But it's quite intuitive. EL R2B2. What does that mean? EL stands for English, right? So they want to know what's your English score. So that means if your English score was say a A2, then it counts as a 2, right? In case it wasn't clear just now, for those of you who may not be as familiar, how we get the score, right, is based on your grade. So let's say if you did like mathematics, you got A2. Then the A2 will count as a score of 2. If you got B3, then it will count as a score of 3. Then you can see, right? So you can appreciate how the higher the score, the worse, right? The higher the score means the lower your performance is, right? So ideally, you want the score to be as low as possible, correct? Okay. So ideally, so if you think about it, right? So let's say if you can get A1 for all your subjects, that's the best. Because A1 across all your subjects means that your L1, R4 will be 5 points, 5 points. And then 5 points, you minus away the 3 bonus, you get 2. So the minimum, the lowest you can go is 2. And the most competitive schools will be working on that basis actually. Okay, and then you will see over here, so coming back to Polytechnic, right? So what we compute is number one, what is the score that you got for English, then plus 2 relevant subjects and 2 other best subjects, and then minus your CCA bonus points again, right? So that's the way they calculate that. For Polytechnic, what you need to recognize is that because Poly offers a lot more courses compared to JC, there are going to be different tracks, different blocks in Poly, where their so-called relevant subjects are different. And there are also going to be certain entry requirements that differ from different subjects. For example, if let's say a Poly course track is more focused on, say, like media, they may focus more on, your subjects like your languages, humanities, etc. But if you are going more on, like, say, finance or engineering track, then they may be more focused on your mathematics, A-math, your sciences. So it also depends. So Poly is a lot more diverse. JC actually is quite similar, but Poly, because of the many nature of the different courses you can take, right, the requirements would differ from Poly to Poly and from course to course. So I'm going to show you all an example of how that looks. So in case you are interested, right, to look at that really. And in fact, again, you all can see the takeaway message here is that thinking about Sec 2 to Sec 3 is not a standalone thing. It's really working backwards from what it already means, right? When you take all these subjects and you take the exam and you go into your Poly and JC, it is already having some implications for that already. So how do you even think about some of these, right? Is you can already go to the MOE website, the MOE course finder, to find some of the information on that. So I'm going to now demonstrate for you all, okay, so that you all can take a look at where we can get this information from. Okay, so just give me a minute while I toggle over to that. So right now, you all should be able to see the screen. Just give me a minute while it load. Okay. Okay, so if you all look at this particular slide here, right, this is what we call as the MOE Course Finder page. So if you all look at this MOE Course Finder page, the way to look at this, right, so if I just copy and paste this and put it inside the chat so that everybody can see that. Okay, so if you all click on this here, you all can actually find this course finder. And the course finder itself actually provides a one-stop directory of all the polytechnic courses offered at the different poly. So if I give you an example, right, so you can see over here, one of the course which is on AI and data engineering, right? So right now AI is quite a hot space. So if you click on this AI and data engineering, you can actually see from there what are the entry requirements. So you see, for O-level students seeking admission, they will actually tell you, right? Okay, for English, they need a grade of 1 to 7. That's a specific requirement. Additional mathematics or mathematics 1 to 6, and any of the other subjects 1 to 6 as well. So why am I talking about this? It's because when you think about your selection of subjects, even at Set 3 and Set 4, it's already worthwhile thinking that beyond that, what are you interested in doing, right? Are you interested in going to JC, or are you already settled on finding something in poly that you want to do? And if that's the case, it's already worthwhile to just go to this, like the course finders, looking at the requirements for that, and to see that, they are not unnecessarily closing yourself off to something because you never take the certain subject. So that's the thought process behind that. It's about making sure that you are in a good position. So if you look at it here, right, the reason why they put all this out is because clearly these are the subjects that will give them the foundation that they need to do well in this course. So understandably, that's also what you should be preparing yourself for, right? That's what you should be working towards as well, right? As you select your subject combination in Sec 3 and Sec 4. You wouldn't want to be doing something that is totally so different, or having something that's totally missing. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like later, such that then the gap becomes too big to close, right? And hard for you to adapt, be it whether you are trying to go to JC or whether you are trying to go to poly later as well, right? So that's the idea behind that too. Okay, so that's the other thing that I wanted to highlight here, and that's the thing to note. Okay, so that's for those of you who want to find out more. The link that I just shared, you can use that as a way to look at the course finder. Okay, the course finder, then you can get a sense. For JC equivalent, you can just use MOE School Finder. So if you just Google MOE School Finder, you will be able to get the information there too. Okay, can? Yeah. So the next thing that I wanted to touch a bit on is, remember just now I did mention, so I've given you all some, texture now, right? Some taste of essentially what the, after the Sec 4, the admissions to poly, to JC, what that looks like and how that cascades down, right? In terms of the subjects that you all can pick. I want to give you all now a sense of, the subject combination, right? And what that could look like. And just based on actual artifacts of schools, and what are some of the requirements that they set, so that you all can see from there as well. So I'm just going to give you an example here. So toggling over to this slide, right? You all can see that this was actually a real life example actually, right? For this year, right? For Crescent, right? I'm not endorsing Crescent or anything, but just using an example, just to give you all a sense, right? And you all can see over here, right? For Crescent, right? They allow their students, those taking G3 level subjects, to offer between 6 to 8 subjects, right? 6 to 8 subjects. And in terms of what that combination look like, you can see there are different combinations that they can take. So as mentioned, right, if you look at it in terms of 7 subject and 8 subject, 7 subject can look like, what the student can take one single science. So maybe they can take, say, chemistry, and then with double humans. Double humans means what? Double humans means maybe they can take combine social studies with history, and then they can take like geography. That would be an example of double humans, right? Next, if you look at something like double science with single humans, it could look like double science could be pure physics, pure chem, and then for single humans, if it's single, it will always be together with social studies one, right? So it will be social studies and something, right? That you cannot not do the social studies part. So what you will have is you will have social studies and then maybe history, for example. Okay, so that's how they look at it. And you can see here, right? So what is telling, I want to draw your attention to this particular page that they have, which you can see, right, is what I mean by the requirements. And there would be that in all your schools. It's just that the requirement will look a bit different only. So you can see for their case, right? So you can see the compulsory one, more or less, you can see are the core subjects, right? English, mother tongue, mathematics are core. But you see here, for the additional mathematics, that's where there's slight variance. So you see in their school, right? It's just compulsory. So that means at Sec 2, if you took all G3, Sec 3, you have to take additional mathematics, right? And that works a bit differently compared to other schools where students are still given a choice, correct? So again, that will depend from school to school. Other requirements, do you see? So other requirements that they have, do you see here? When we look at, for instance, pure science. So let's say some students are wondering, right? Maybe you may wonder, I know the age-old question is always, do I need to take triple science, pure science, right? Physics, chem, bio. So this school allows for that, right? They make allowance for that. But you can see there is certain requirement that you need to fulfill in Sec 2, right? That means you see, I need to get at least 70% in math, 75% in science, and 65% overall, right? So they set a bar, and you must meet the bar before you can take that particular combination of subjects, right? And you can see over here, same as well. So perhaps a bit less of a bar here, but for literature, history, and all that, you can see for them to take G3 history, they need to at least pass the subject, right? So this is what we mean by the kind of requirements, right, that they have. Okay, so this is an example here just to give you a sense of the kind of subject combination. The subject combination wouldn't change too much from schools to schools in terms of what you can take, because essentially the core things that you need to do is always the core, and then the electives are the other things that you can pick. But what can change is the number of subjects. You can see, for instance, for Crescent, they actually have this allowance for up to 8. But in some schools, actually 8 is more an exception rather than the norm, right? So you see over here, so here is they actually have up to 8, and they actually spell out for you what a 8 subject combination look like. You see, 8 subject combination. But in some schools, actually, it will be more of 7 being a norm, right? So it really depends on school to school, right? School to school, and that's the part to note. Okay, hang on. Okay, only part of it is visible. Let me just check. Okay, thanks for highlighting. Let me just scroll it the other side. I think now it should be okay. Thanks very much. Yeah. Okay, just to highlight, I think the ones that I went through just now, right? Sorry about that. I think it was the screen issue. Let me just redo this again so that y'all can see. So now I think y'all should see clearer already. So this is what I mean. So y'all can see here, G3 triple science. You want to take triple science, this is the requirement that you need to take. Okay, and then if you want to do like G3 history, then it's at least 50% in history. So there are certain requirements that differs from school to school. And if I give you another example, so this time around is over here. You can see for here, this is from Hougang, right? So Hougang Secondary, you can see again, in terms of what they look like, in terms of the core subjects and the electives, is pretty similar. But you can see over here, additional mathematics is not something that is compulsory for their students, even if they had taken G3 level subjects, right? So you can see there's already a difference between this school and another school, right? And then in terms of the requirements that they have is also a bit different, right? So you can see here, if they want to take pure sciences, is B3 or better in math and science. So their requirement, you can see, is a bit varied, right, across different schools, right? So that's the thing that you all can also see here also. And you can see, in fact, in their briefing, they don't really even focus that much on 8 subject possibility. It's really more coming from 7, right, more for the G3 students, and 6 for the G1/G2, right? So again, why that would differ also will depend on the school itself. And ultimately, it's also the level of resources, the number of teachers they have, classes they have as well, and scheduling, right? So that's how we look at it. Okay, so this is just to give you all a sense also, right, of how that could look. Interestingly, even for some of the electives, you will see it also depends on your school. So I can even tell you a very niche example is some schools are actually, I'm sure you all may not have heard that much because it's not even in that many schools. So some schools actually offer economics at secondary level. And it's really only that 2 or 3 schools. That is, one example of a very niche subject that some schools offer, some don't. And some schools offer POA, right? So principles of accounting, right? But some don't, right? So again, some of these elective subjects also will depend on school. So you have to find out from your school whether that subject is being offered. And most of the time, why is really number 1, a matter of legacy, and number 2, that resources are limited, and so they do focus on certain subject areas that they have already been providing for, right? So that's the part that you all also want to check with your school as well. Okay, Ken? So that's the second part. So touching on the different subject combination and letting you all have a sense of the kind of requirements, right, that schools sometimes have, okay? And then just now I have also talked about the L1, R4 system and also the different polytechnics requirement as well. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go back to the slide just to let you all see a few more things, right? Okay, so let me just toggle this over first, okay? Okay, so now as we load the slide, the main thing that I wanted to highlight is that we have talked quite a bit about, going to the JAE and post-secondary. Now I want to touch a bit of a few more actionable things that is going to be important, okay? So let me just toggle this over. Okay, so Shui is okay, right? The slide can see, right? Just to double check. Yeah, okay. Can, okay. Okay, so the next part here that we wanted to highlight here, right, is that with regards to junior college, right? And here is something that quite practicable that I wanted to already highlight because there's real implication, right? Just now we talked about the points cut off, right? So what points do you need to be able to go to JC? But the next thing that you all need to recognize now, and this is the one with the most immediate impact actually, is what is the requirements, right, for certain kind of JC related subjects. And that's something I think will be, probably at the back of your mind also, right? So very common question asked. I can tell you a very few common question is, so teacher, right, I know when I go to JC, right, and just to give you all a sense also, for those of you who are looking at junior college after Sec 4, is that this is generally the subject combination that I can take. You can either be in science, art, or hybrid. So if you see for science, the way it's framed is usually like that. So they will do like physics, chemistry, math, or econs, or biology, chemistry, math, or economics. These are the very common options. And in case you're wondering, how come got these economics and everything? It's part of the move towards what we call as a contrasting subject in JC. So usually in JC, what happens is that you won't be doing all science or all humanities, right? They want you to have balance. So the way they have balance means you see like that, lor. So you see, you will do like 3 science C subject. Then you will be balanced with 1 art C, 1 humans type subject to make it balanced for yourself. So one of the very common one is what we call as physics, chem, math, and economics. Biology, chem, math, and economics. These are the most popular subject combination options in junior college actually, right? And usually people do them at what we call as the H2 level. H2 is, you can think of it as the intermediate level difficulty, right? And it's between H1 and H3. H1 is the least advanced one and H3 is the most advanced. Usually people will take at the H2 level, right? And H2 level is what they will use for counting towards university admission too, right? And why am I spelling out all this in detail again? You may wonder, right? It's because there's an immediate implication. And the implication that students always ask is, so teacher, right? So now if I think ahead just a little bit more only, and I go to JC, right? And I want to do like say H2 chemistry, or I want to do H2 mathematics. Do I need to take pure chem and do I need to take A maths at Sec 3? Have you wondered? Right? Because you see, right, you realize, right, there's an immediate relevance, correct? Because essentially what you make of your decision directly impacts that already, even though it seems like it's 2 years down the road, right? But is there a requirement? And that's a question that you all need to get answered, correct? And that's what I'm going to answer now. So the way to look at this is like that. I'm going to show you all what prerequisites look like at JC, right? So that y'all can work backwards from there and y'all can determine, right? Do you actually already need to have to do certain subjects in secondary school so as not to close off that option altogether, right? And here is where I'm going to show you some of these JC requirements, so that you can get a sense of that, okay? So I'm going to do that, right? So let me again toggle over to the actual artifacts from the school so that you all can take a look from there, okay? Yeah, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 2 JCs and what the requirements are from there so that you can get a sense, right? So the very first one that I'm going to show you, right, is for National Junior College, right? So again, I don't endorse any certain school. It's more just using as an example, right? So that you can see from there. So if you all look at it this way, right, you can see from here some really interesting things, right? So if you see, this is National Junior College, right? And National Junior College, you can see when we look at the science stream. So science stream, essentially, what they need is they would want the student to be taking chemistry, mathematics, another science, maybe physics or bio, and then a fourth subject, which is a contrasting subject. What I want to direct your attention to is that very last column. So I'm going to again toggle this over a bit so that you all can see the very last column. The remarks column, right, is the prerequisite. Is the prerequisite. So you can see over here, right? So you can see over here, right, for this particular partner. Let me just move it over a bit, okay? Yeah, not sure why, because I'm using this at the center, the screen may be a bit more occluded. Let me just bring it over. I think it should be fine now. Okay, so you all can see the last column, that is the prerequisite actually. And you can see over here, the good news is, right, from this school, just as an example, there is no binding requirement for one. If you look at, for example, like chemistry, that you must take the pure chemistry equivalent of it. So that's one question that always come up, which is, teacher, I want to take H2 Chem in JC, But right now, I have an option between taking combined physics and chem and pure chem. So does it mean, teacher, if I don't take pure chem, I cannot do H2 chem? So that's a very common question. And you can see from here, actually, it's not really the case, right? And in many schools, so it depends on school to school, but for many schools, usually, it's not like a strict prerequisite for you to have to take that pure subject for you to be able to do it at the H2 level in JC. Okay, so what I mean by that is that, if you do want to do H2 Chem, doing the combined science version for many of the schools generally is okay. But what the schools will generally expect from you is to bridge. Bridge means to be able to take part in some of those bridging programs in school, or to learn and catch up, right? Because there will be a gap between what you have learned at combined science at secondary school versus what you need to do at JC level. So there is going to be a catch up to do. So in short, that means if you only do combined, like combined physics or combined chem, the level of materials that you have learned is not going to be rigorous enough compared to the other students. But it's not going to close you off to doing H2 chemistry in JC. But what they are expecting you to do is to be able to catch up. And sometimes they will offer you also bridging programs, or even bridging sessions or materials for you to catch up. Okay. But what doesn't work usually is it cannot be the case. And this is what I mean. Like, tell me, hey teacher, I want to do H2 chem in JC, but in secondary school, I don't want to do chem first. Then that one, there's a problem. See, that is what I mean by a problem. So it cannot be, I want to do combined science, I want to do physics and bio, but I don't want to do chem. But go to JC, I want to see first, maybe I still want to do chem. Then that one is super difficult, if not almost impossible. So you at least have to have done that subject, be it in a pure or combined form in secondary school before you can do that at the JC level. Okay, so that's the thing, that's the practical part already. There you can see, so working backwards from there, have a sense already, right? Have a sense of, essentially, if I want to go to post-secondary, where do I want to go, right? Is it poly? Is it JC? If it's JC, do I already have a sense of, what is my subject preference and interest, and what are these subjects I do want to take? And if these are the subjects, then it makes sense, then you don't close yourself off in terms of your subject choices in secondary school, right? So that's the first part. The next very common question, guys, is AMATs. And that's always the $1,000,000 question that we always get, right? Which is for additional mathematics, right? For additional mathematics, what is the requirement? So that means, let's say, right, if I look at JC, and then there's this equivalent, which is H2 mathematics. H2 mathematics. A lot of students will ask, right? So, teacher, if I never take A math in secondary school, can I still take H2 mathematics in JC? Right? And that's a very important question, because H2 mathematics in JC is a very staple subject. Most people are going to take that. And if you don't take it, actually, it's one of those staple, actually, right? It is going to be a problem. And some people will wonder, right? So if I don't take A math, does it mean that I cannot take H2 math in JC? And again, the answer to this, I would say for most of the schools, in fact, all, if you don't take A math, you will still be allowed to take H2 mathematics at JC, but there will be a lot of bridging again. So that means for many of the schools, what they will do is they will offer you a bridging module or bridging program alongside that. And some schools will also give you some materials to bridge to that level. But importantly to note, right? So even though they may not have mandated that as a requirement, it is very important for you all to be already aware that AMath, additional mathematics, if you want to go to JC, and I can say that upfront right now, additional mathematics is the precursor to a lot of the things that you learn in JC. So if you cannot cope with AMath in secondary 3 and 4, the chances that you're able to cope with math at GC is also quite low. So you can think of it as it's almost like a prerequisite actually, right? So it's not something that you should avoid, especially if you want to go to JC, right? Because it's essentially AMath is the foundation for whatever that you're going to learn at JC, right? So if you need to pick, right, that should always be something that you should try to pick to do, right? For additional mathematics, if you are interested in going to the JC route. That's something that I can already say as a very practicable thing. Um, some students do eventually drop it. I think if you face reality, some students do better at AMath compared to others, right? But that usually the choice that they will make is, after Sec 3, they can see. So after Sec 3, they realize, they tried and everything, and maybe it doesn't quite work out. And that's where they need to realize they have to strategize. Maybe they have to refocus, focus back on math and everything. Then they make a choice to maybe drop that at the end of Sec 3. But there will be that avenue for that decision to be made. But I would think that from a start, there's no reason for you to just close it off right now. Because and I'll say that probably at Sec 2, I don't think any of you are that turned off by math that you say once and for all, I'm not going to go into math yet. Yeah, because the reality is really going into. So I will show you all here, right? So you all can see over here. This is the example for another JC, right? And you can look at it over here in terms of the mathematics, right? So you can see, right? H2 remarks assume knowledge. They just assume you already know everything that you need to know for O-level AMath already. You see? That's the part, right? And in fact, you can see here the requirement that they did was they actually spelled out a C6 for both O-level math and AMath, right? So in fact, here they were a bit more binding, but generally schools, for many of the schools, there are allowances that they make because they do recognize at some point some students may have dropped that subject, but they still want to go to JC. So there are allowances made, be it through bridging modules, bridging programs, and everything. But the takeaway here is that to ease your path into JC, right? I would say that AMath is an important foundational prerequisite, given that many of you will be taking H2 mathematics at the JC level, right? So that's the other thing to note as well. Okay, so you can see how are all these useful. It's just using the same thought process, right? If you look at some of these JC documents, the requirements for the courses to be taken, it's already a good way for you to work backwards to see, okay, now looking at these subjects, then it makes sense that I want to do this, right, at the secondary level, right? So for example, it wouldn't make sense that say for example, you want to do bio at JC, but then you say, okay, but I don't want to do anything related to bio now at secondary, correct? So bio becomes non-existent for me. It wouldn't really make sense that way, correct? So that's essentially some of the prep that you can already do to make sure that be it you have the subject prerequisite or at least minimally you ensure that you are well prepared, right, for all the foundation that you need going into JC and going into post-secondary. I'm not going to go through the poly one in detail because the poly is really too diverse. So poly, like what I said, I have given you all the site, the course finder. You all can go there to see what are all the requisites for the poly. And from there, again, it's just a matter of working backwards to see what is needed as well, right? Again, another $1 million question that always come up is, what about uni, right? And again, right, so again, I think the thought on your mind is that, are we thinking too far? And the answer to that is no, we're not thinking too far. Because if you just look at it, right, the reality is that it's not that far away. So all of you here, right, you may find that it's like very far. But you see, you all are Sec 2 this year, right? 2 more years, you all are done with Sec 4 already. Then, if you go to JC, 2 more years only, you go uni already. Do you all realize that? So within 4 years, you are ready for uni already. Do you realize how fast it is? Your P6 was like very long, right? So P1 to P6 is 6 years, right? But now all it takes is 4 years from now, and you are already talking about uni already. So it's not that far away. That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is that because of how near it is again interlinked. So what you can take at uni will be dependent on what you took at JC as well. And what you do at GC is linked to what you pick at secondary, which is what I just explained. So I want to talk a bit about uni because again, there are several million-dollar questions that always come up and some very common misconception also. One is some of the very popular combinations that people want to take at uni, which is, of course, dentistry, medicine, law, engineering. What are the requirements for that? So if you think about it naturally, right? So if there are requirements for that, then again, it makes sense that you don't close yourself off at this point. I'm going to show it to you all now, okay? So if you all look at the slide here, this is just an example using NUS, right? So NUS departments, right? So I want to use this also as a good example to clarify some misconception, especially for subjects like dentistry and medicine. So let's go to medicine because that's always the one that's at the back of a lot of people's mind, right? So if you look at medicine here, a lot of people have this misconception that for medicine, right, I need triple science. So I need triple science, then I can get into medicine. So hence, I need to do triple science to get to get a shot. But you realize actually that's not the case. So if you look at it here in terms of the requirement, in reality, actually they just need chemistry and another science. And in fact, it's not even bio, Some people's misconception is I need to learn bio because it's human body, right? Very, very natural reaction, but it's not that. The prerequisite is chemistry. Chemistry is like the anchor science subject. And you need that. Then on top of that, you just need another H2 subject. You can either have physics or you can either have bio. But guys, you all know what's the implication, right? So the implication is if you do want to go to medicine, the way to work backwards from there is I will need H2 chemistry, correct? If I need H2 chemistry, that means I need to do that in JC. I would then need to have done something related to chemistry at Sec 3, Sec 4. Correct? So you cannot close yourself off to that. So that's what we mean by working backwards, right? So that's for medicine. And then if you look at some other subjects, for example, like law, right? So law, generally, I would say this is GP and KI. This general paper and knowledge and inquiry are the English type subjects that you will do at JC. So it's not quite likely that you will miss the requirement. So for law, I think it's quite clear cut. Okay, and others, right? So if you are interested in the others, for example, here, right? So if you see, for instance, business analytics like H2 pass in math or further mathematics, very good pass in H2 math, even dentistry. So dentistry, you can see, actually interestingly, dentistry is the same requirement as medicine. Actually, it's the same requirement as medicine too, right? So from there, right, you can actually see again the prerequisites that are needed, right? So it's already something that is useful, particularly I would say if you're looking at some of those really competitive faculty, it's not too early to think about it already, right? So it's just working backwards from there and seeing what is needed, right? So that's how we think about it. Okay, so this is the uni type requirement. So in short, the takeaway here is that okay, as we look at our subject combination, think through, right? Think a bit further ahead to where do you want to go already, right? Is it JC? Is it poly? And do you already have a sense of what are these interest areas that will be helpful, right? And in fact, is there already something that you're setting your sights on at uni level? And that one is not exaggeration. I have literally some primary 6 students or primary 5 students telling me, teacher, I'm setting my sight on medicine, or my sister at Sec 1, Sec 2 already is confirmed need to go into medicine. Then it's worthwhile working back from there and looking at the requirement, right? So that's how we look at it. Okay, so that's one key portion, right? Thinking of it, and that's what we mean very practically. What do we mean when we say thinking of it in line with what your aspirations are, what your vision about your future is? That's how we are looking at this. Okay, yeah. So that's the other thing that I wanted to highlight here. Okay. Okay, any questions so far, just feel free to also post it and we'll be happy to take them live as well, okay? Okay, so now going back to the slides again, okay? I have talked about the internal criterion already, right, for the JC, and the idea that essentially for different JC, they will have different criterion of their own, right? So that's the thing. The next part that I wanted to talk a bit about, right, is really in terms of the subject-specific considerations. So I think I have talked quite a bit at length about the working backwards and the pathways across JC, and here is what I touched on just now, right, with regards to even university level and some of the polytechnic level as well. Now I think I will touch a bit, and this will be the last part actually, on subject-specific consideration, because I think that will be the other burning question on your minds, right? In fact, I've alluded a bit to that just now. The two main ones, which is what's AMath, right? I have not seen AMath in action before, and what is combined science, right? And how do I choose, right? Do I need to take AMath? And for science, do I take combined science or do I take pure? What's the difference? So I'm going to touch a bit on that so that you also have a sense of that, right? And to let you all see also, right? So in some of the subjects, what does that really look like in terms of the questions so that you are familiar too, right? And yeah, so just a few questions, right? So number one, even before I go into that, is English, is it the most important subject? Certainly so. So if you look at it here, right, I've talked about that just now as well. The L1 R4 system, the L1 typically English is is a defining subject in the sense that you can really get put down, because the thing is, in reality, you can do very well for your R4, but if the single language is the one that you often struggle at, you can see how that really bumps up your L1 R4 score very high, which is not what you want. So and you can also see that English itself has a minimum score requirement that I talk about, right? And it's important that, for example, if you fail it, there are complications, right? You have to retake. And if you retake and you don't pass, then you have to move out from the JC. So there are quite important implications. And also plus the fact that English is always in reality going to be the language of learning, and it's always going to be the language of presentation, right? Be it at work or in school. So definitely I would say is without a doubt, right, one of the most important subjects that you still have to continue to master. And unfortunately, it will stay as so, right, throughout, I would say throughout your life, because even at work next time, be it in terms of your interview skills, your presentation skills, the way you work and discuss things with people is also through communications, is also through English as well, right? So that will not change actually, right? Okay, but next, looking at math, right? So again, the question here is AMath. What exactly is this topic on AMath, subject on AMath? And if you just put it in this table, right, in terms of the difference between the two subjects, for many of you here, right, because you are at Sec 1 and Sec 2, you all will be only familiar with mathematics so far. I would say that, going on to Sec 3 and Sec 4, you will continue to do math, right? So just to be clear, so guys, like the name suggests, right, AMath is additional. So it's not like you either do AMath or math, you do both. So if you do AMath, it's on top of math. So you take it as two different subjects, okay? So just to be clear. And I would say that actually, the interesting thing is that there are students who do very well for AMath, um, and maybe even better for AMath than math, right? And I would say that, the interesting thing about this is what? Is that for math, I would say over time, as you go to Sec 3 and Sec 4, there are more context-specific things that they can vary. That means there are questions like, I'm sure for the Sec 1 and Sec 2 here, you all have seen the problems in real-world context kind of question, right? Where they ask you about comparing the taxi fare, comparing the Singtel bills and that kind of thing. And those are not easy because those you cannot memorize, correct? You cannot, I won't say memorize, but there is no standard way of solving it, correct? You cannot like do a lot of practice and then say, oh, this question come out before, I know how to do it. Because problems in real world context, actually, there are a lot of different variation. So because of the context, it makes it challenging. But additional mathematics, I would say the questions wise are a lot more standard. So in fact, over time, as you practice and you practice and you practice, you probably can hit about 70 to 80% of the question types. It's pretty standard. But the hard part about it is that number one, it involves super loads of algebra. So if you want to do well in additional mathematics, you need to be really good at algebra. And I cannot like stress the importance of that. So that means, now at Sec 1 and Sec 2, right? If you all are still struggling with, oh, minus give you a plus, how do I expand quadratic equation, expansion? If you're still struggling with that, you will struggle a lot with A maths. Because you can imagine A maths, like you see mathematics, your workings is like 3 step. A maths, your working is 8, 9, 10 steps. And anytime you get anything wrong along the way, it affects your answer and your workings throughout. And it's a lot of algebra, right? It's mainly algebra actually. So you have to be very strong at algebra, right? You have to be, and it's more theoretical. So I'll show you some examples later, but you have to be good at proving things, show this, prove that. And it's going to be a lot more abstract also. So you don't really see a lot of abstract stuff in math, right? When you do in Sec 1 and Sec 2. Sec 1 and Sec 2 is quite practical, right? You look at math, it's quite practical. We are learning about speed, we are learning about rate, percentages, whole numbers, etc. But additional mathematics can be really abstract, right? So when you do things like, so they will ask you things like expanding algebra terms up to the 12th term, the 13th term, etc. Right? So it can be very abstract. And so it's really, I would say, using a different part of your mathematical mind, right? And some people do better at that, some people a bit less so. But the unfortunate thing is that if you want to go to H2 math at GC, and if you want to do university level, um, anything to do with university level mathematics courses, it will all require A math as the basic requirement. So I would say that it's not something that you should actively avoid at this time, unless you are very, very clear. Like I know some of my students, in fact, for most of my students, right, what they will do is they'll give it a try first. They will usually just say, okay, I'll try. But at the end of Sec 3, it's just not working out. I'm just failing. And then I'm also failing my math. And naturally, I have to strategize, right? So I can't be failing both at the end of the Sec 4. I want to focus on math, but I'll give out A math. And I'm very clear, it's okay because I'm going to Polytechnic. This course doesn't even require A math. So once those are clear, I think then it's okay to make a decision. But at this point in time, I don't think for most of you at least, there's a need to really close off that in that sense. Yeah, because you will see that A math linking in particular to the JC route is a very important foundational requisite actually, right? And so what is needed? So essentially algebra proficiency. And I'm going to show you an example, okay? So I will show you using our worksheet itself, how that looks so that you can also take a look at that and have an appreciation of it. And you can kind of like mentally compare it, you see, against what you all already do from your class in secondary school, right? In Sec 1 and Sec 2. So this is an example, right? This is what we call as the topic on differentiation that our Sec 4 students learn, right? Differentiation is one of the biggest topic in A math. So you can see here a lot of, just more abstract, right? And, a lot of different understanding different rules. So in this case, understanding rules of differentiation and how to apply them, right? And that's what we do in class also. So giving these examples, concepts to the students so that they can learn that, right? And then if I just give you an example of the question, right, you can see over here, things like determine. Do you see? You don't really see that much in math, but in A math, you see a lot. Show, determine, right? And it's not like finding an answer. So in math, you see a lot of times you just calculate this. So your answer is a number, right? But here it's not. You see? Here is they say determine, is it an increasing or decreasing function? So in your mind, it's like one step ahead. So it's not just a number, but you have to first ask yourself, okay, if you wanted me to determine is this increasing or decreasing, what is the clue that I need? How do I show if something is increasing or not? And what are the workings that I need to show that? Then you write out the working and then you link it to this. So it's what we'll call as higher order mathematical thinking, right? Higher order. When we think about this kind of determine kind of question, and you can see over here as well, right? So even things like that, you see? So it looks like it's a graph, and some of you will probably have seen graphs in math also, but you can see this graph is more abstract, right? So you have to think about things like expressing the area, and then finding things like rate of change and everything. So this is an example that just for you to appreciate. But it's not to discourage anyone from doing also. So I'm not objectively, I wouldn't say. In fact, for me, if I were to say, I would say that you use a different part of your mind. It's not to say that this is naturally harder than math, but it just uses a different part of your mathematical mind. And I've seen many cases, very interesting cases, where there are students actually who do well in A math, but not in math. And there are also students who do well in math and not in A math. It's possible, right? It is possible. Of course, there are students also who struggle with both and who do well in both. Lah. But the idea here is that it's not to just say if you cannot do well in math, you cannot do well in A-math. That one is not true. That one is not true because it's number one, again, your ability level in particular in algebra. And number two, also your ability to recognize these patterns, these standard questions, and knowing what they are testing. And once you can do that, actually, you can pretty much tackle A-math pretty well, right? And yeah, so that's the thing to note. Okay, so this is just to give you a sense. So in short, the takeaway here is A-math, there is these skills involved. I would say that going into JC math, it is an important prerequisite. So if you do want to go into JC, and also for some of the poly courses, do look at what's their requisites. Try not to close yourself off to this first. Okay, so that's the thing that I wanted to highlight here as well. Okay, Ken? Right, so that's for A math. Okay, the next part is I want to go into the other portion, which is on combined science. Right, so that's the other question, right? So I've answered for A math, right? So the good news for A math is that it is not a hard prerequisite for JCs in general, right? In that if you don't take it, they won't say, no, you cannot come into H2 mathematics. They will give you bridging programs, they will help you, they will help to support you, right? But the thing is, having that foundation in secondary school is still very important because if you never had that foundation, it's very hard to do well also in JC. So in fact, there's always this saying lah, it goes for combined science, it goes for math also. So if you think of it this way, it's like if math difficulty level is like a 3, then A math is probably like a 4 or a 5 out of 10. Then that's secondary school. Then JC math will be 8 or 9. So literally you see the difficulty level will jump a lot. So you can think of it that way, right? So math like 3 or 4, 3 or 4, A math 4 or 5. But again, like I said, it's not that far, it's not that different from each other. Like I said, it's a different part of your mathematical brain. But objectively speaking, the JC math will be a huge jump. It will be about 8 or 9, usually, the way we think about it. And that will have A math as the prerequisite. Okay. And a similar thing goes for, like, for example, if you look at pure science as well, right? So if you look at the pure science part, okay, let me just adjust the screen again. Okay. So the pure science or combined science part, and this will be the last part of my presentation, okay? So the idea here is that you can see a lot of students do ask as well, right? So teacher, right, what is this like pure science and combined science about? In fact, I would say that for most of the schools, when you do it in secondary 1 and 2, is like literally just science combined together, right? So you're just learning all the different topics combined together, but at Sec 3 and Sec 4, it will be split up. So for Sec 3 and Sec 4, pure science means you will just study chemistry on its own. That's pure chem. Physics on its own is pure physics, and bio on its own is pure bio. The other option that you have is what we call as combined science. So combined science means what? Combined science means you are studying 2 subjects combined as one. So you take them as though it's like you're just scored like as though it's one subject. So that one subject can either be physics/chem, bio/chem, or bio/physics. The most common ones that are offered in school is the physics and chem, and also bio and chem, right? Then you can ask, but what's the difference between these two? What is the difference between pure science and combined science? The way we look at it, if you look at this slide, pure science understandably has a lot more breadth and depth because you can see there are only one shot just focusing on one subject only. So I would say combined science is about 75% of the coverage compared to pure science for that particular subject. So if let's say pure physics you cover 100%, physics in combined science is about 75%. Okay, so that's one part. And what are some of the very specific like topics? Some topics are not covered. So like combined science, chemistry, you don't cover things like electrolysis. For physics, you don't cover things like electromagnetic concepts and everything. So there are some certain topics that drop out. So pure will have more content, more topics, and more learning outcome. Their questions will be harder. So literally, there will be more questions that apply contextual info, deduction, and so on. But combined science will be more focused on concept recall and less, I would say less problem solving in the sense that less calculation. For example, if you look at like mole concept, okay, mole concept is that concept of calculation in chemistry. There's a lot more mathematics involved for pure chemistry as compared to combined. So that's also the other thing. So you can see generally, I'll say objectively, it is easier for combined science. Right? And that's also the reason actually why people switch to combined, because they find themselves struggling with the pure sciences part. Okay. And so that's the thing to note here. And you can see even in terms of the format, right? The format for the pure one, which is the one on the left side, a lot more rigorous, a lot more intense compared to the one on the right. Okay, so the one on the right, you can see in terms of the coverage, right, for each of the subject is lower, like 65 marks, but for the left is 80 marks. Even the practical exam also. So practical exam for pure science, time duration is longer, right? Time duration for combined science practical is a lot shorter, and usually it's just following instruction only. So combined science, you just need to follow instruction. They tell you what to do, you follow. You write down your measurement. They will mark based on your measurement. But pure science, very different. Pure science, the practical, you have to plan, right? They want to see how you plan. They give you that judgment. You have to make the judgment. Okay, how long do I need to measure for? How many intervals? They will also assess you besides your answer, your techniques and everything. So you can see here, the challenge is there. That's why it's called pure science, right? Compared to the combined science. And that's why we had a discussion just now as well as to, is there a prerequisite for that when it leads on to the H2 physics, H2 chemistry at the JC level. The idea behind that is that, like what I said, it usually is not a hard requisite, right? So as you can see from the JC just now, but it is useful to just take a look at the different JC requirements, because there are going to be idiosyncratic requirement. So while some schools usually they don't have that prerequisite of having a pure chem for H2 chem, sometimes they may have extra things like bridging programs and all that you have to go through. Okay. But again, if you go back to the foundation, is that the pure one will of course give you the better foundation for JC science, right? The pure one will give you more rigor, more coverage, right? To give you the right level of foundation for GC science. Okay, so that's the way to think about it. But again, there is a practicality element, which is if science was never much your cup of tea, and you really just need it as a way to satisfy that requirement, not requirement per se, but one of the subject in the R1, R4, right? And you feel like, you're not probably going to go down a very sciencey path in the future, it could make sense, right? And in fact, a lot of students do eventually. So some of my students as well. In fact, some of my students really, they drop really late. Like there are cases like one of my students, he only dropped like from pure to combine after his prelims. So after Sec 4 prelim, he dropped, right? He dropped pure to combine. That one I feel will be a bit late. So if anything, that decision to drop can come a bit earlier, right? Like maybe, after the Sec 3 exam and all as well. Because the reason for that is because you see, for him, like he dropped so late, right? Like he literally went into the combined science practical, not knowing the requirement of combined science practical. Because he has never done combined science practical, he has always been doing the pure science one. So again, it's the idea that we need to be tactical about all these as well, right? Yeah, and number one, don't close off the routes for ourselves. But as we try it on, have a good sense make, have a good reality check of where we are and how we are managing, and be prepared, right, to adjust accordingly, right, and promptly as well. So that's also the other thing. Okay. Okay, and yeah, so like what we said, um, depending on the school again, different schools will have different requirements. So like for example, the ones I said I showed you just now for Crescent and for Hougang, they will have their own requirements for when you can take the pure science and when you can't. So again, it will be contingent on your performance in your Sec 2 exams too. And so that's the other thing to take note. Okay. Okay, finally, I'll just wrap off with this last part, which is on the finally, right? So we have covered things about the different pathways and what's the implication. I've also touched a bit about the different subjects, and I think leading into this last period, it does make sense. What is the role of us as parents or even as students, right? How do we think as we think about the subjects that we want to take? So of course, first is like what I mentioned just now, the aspiration and future goal. I will start with that first because that is literally the first part of what I was saying, right? Just looking ahead a bit, right? Is there a certain path that I envision for myself, right? As I go into post-secondary, right? And I'm more inclined towards JC, poly, or other routes. And if so, are there already certain subject leanings that I'm going towards? Next, then look at it, am I really feeling very strongly about certain university program? Like to me, is it, I'm really setting my hearts on medicine, dentistry, or something. So it may not always lead there, but you certainly wouldn't want to close off any routes unnecessarily at this point. So it's about working backwards from there and knowing the requirement, right? So that's the first part. Second part, of course, is your overall Sec 2 performance, which you cannot control at this point in time, right? So that is already done. And I think I would say don't worry too much about the outcome. Make the best of what you have, right? Based on the deck of cards that you have been allocated, right? But what is telling from there is telling about your own ability to cope and your aptitude for the subject. Because honestly, if you look at it, you do need to have a good reality check that is this a subject that you can cope? And it's like one example that I gave you just now, right? Which is it may be the case that the student all along was not really able to cope with that particular subject, but really just wanted to try, right? But if we don't have that reality check, it may result in something like that, where you just hold on until you realize, oh, Sec 4 really cannot already, right? And I'll just drop it. Then it may not be the best outcome for yourself as well, right? So do have that reality check based on your aptitude for the subject and also your ability to cope in the sense of the number of subjects. Because if you look at it, but generally it'll be those few lah, so it won't be too different, right? But for the schools that do offer eight, I think we usually have a very kiasu mindset, right? Which is, oh, maybe the more the better. And if I can cope, why not do more? But it may not always be like that, right? And in fact, if you look at the philosophy going forward now, it's not really more means better. It's more, but in what sense, right? More, but not just doing academics, but also freeing up some of this time for other exploration. And that's also precisely why like MOE and all move towards the L1 R4 model, right? So it's also about thinking through that. And finally, I would say the last one that I reserved was the most important, which is your interest, because ultimately you also have to ask yourself, right? So is it an area that you are interested in? For example, like humanities, if you were never interested in geography, then don't force yourself to do like social studies / geography, right? Try another subject that you are more interested in, or even for sciences. So the very fact is now you do have this different option. Think about what is most of meaning to you, of use to you, of interest to you. But again, like I said, don't let's say if you see that you do have a future where you want to do H2 chem, don't just drop chem right now lah. That's what I mean also. Or if you see that you do have a future where you want to do H2 physics or some program like poly that require physics, then don't just say, okay, I'm not going to do physics anymore in secondary. So that's the part about working backwards. So all these have to work all together, right, for you to think through and come up with the best subject combination for yourself. Okay. And I will say that then in this period, the things that's important to know is first, discussing your interest in the subjects and the ability to cope. Two is the aspirations and future and the link to what you should take. Then with that in mind, you look at your combination and then you make your choice in a wise manner, right? And with that, I think that's the best that you can do lah. Okay, and just also note as you go into Sec 3 that it will be quite a big jump because ultimately it's still quite a number. I'm sure all of you are doing quite a number of subjects now already, but you will realize that when you go to Sec 3, number one, a lot of you are going to take over leadership positions in your CCA. So it's going to be more burdensome for you, right? In terms of your responsibilities, in terms of the time that you have, right? So time management becomes more important. And also in terms of, your subjects also, right? Your subjects are going to get, more difficult, more requirements also, right? So definitely make sure that, you are able to adapt well and make sure that you choose the subjects that gives you the best momentum, right, into the new year, right? Okay. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Okay. So that's the key part. And yeah, that's the main part. So I will take some questions now. So I see some question in the chat. So let me address that. And as I address that, maybe I'll just put up these on the chat. Some of you may not have seen this before. These are our Telegram communities. our Telegram communities actually are free for everybody. So be it whether you're a Mind Stretcher student or non-Mind Stretcher student, be it whether you're Sec 1, Sec 2, Sec 3, Sec 4, you're free to join, right? And what do we do on these Telegram communities? We provide free resources, right? Practice materials, questions. We provide free invites to seminars, webinars like that, where it's free for everybody, just so that we know also in terms of the journey, right, from primary to secondary to post-secondary, it's not easy. So we're also trying to see how best to support everybody on this journey. So our teachers are plugged into the Telegram, and that's where also we share our resources freely with the students too. So do feel free to scan the QR code and join here as well. And here another page is really our okay, may I just pause here a bit in case you all need to scan. But this is the secondary communities, right? So if you just scan and then you can actually join them as well. Okay. And another page here is that is this part here is like overall all the resources that we have. So on this page, actually, you will see the communities that I talk about and some of the other educational tools that we are developing to really support our students' learning. So feel free to just scan that, and also you can access all the materials there and the resources too. Okay. I think some of you were asking about humanities. So what's the difference between, say, like geography and history? I would say number one, in terms of the subject matter, definitely very different. So history-wise, I would say in terms of the materials covered vis-a-vis geography, is totally different. Number two, the exam format also. So exam format for history, notably, it follows this structure of source-based question and structured response questions. But the structured response you'll see has become a bit different from the past. So during my time for history, we have to write very long essays, right? But now the essays part, the structured response part has been shortened. So it's a lot more manageable. But the part that students usually face difficulty with is the source-based question. But this one you usually won't see in geography. So the requirement for geography is a bit different. History one, the source-based questions, there is a very standard way of tackling it. And it's a lot like social studies. So I would say one tip here is that for those of you who eventually take social studies slash history, right, it's the easiest to prepare in the sense that the technique is the same. Like how you do exams for social studies is how you do exam for history. And with a big part of it being source-based question. So source-based questions is what? I think some of you, in fact, you all are doing now already, right? How do you evaluate reliability, usefulness, comparing against different sources? What does this source tell you? That kind of thing. So you will continue to see that in history. And it's really about, for that, then it's really about tackling and enhancing your level of responses, trying to hit at a higher level. And this kind of questions is not point-based marking. So I don't mark because you wrote this date, like when did Hitler rise to power? I mark based on my overall impression of the work that you did. So that's for history. Geography doesn't work like that. So it's not a source-based format. I would say that if anything, it's more like a essay type format together with some uh, application-based questions. So it's quite different in terms of the format. So in fact, right now, to see your own strength, you can already see, like right now in school, right? What's your work like when it comes to these two subjects? That's number one. How are you performing on them? And I would say number two, just very practically, how are you doing at source-based question? Because to me, a lot of students that we work with, source-based is always that deal breaker, right? Because now usually the essay part is quite manageable already. But source-based is the one, if people don't get it, they can't get it for a while. So are you able to work through that? And if you can, it's a good advantage for you actually. So I myself in the past, well, in the past actually that has not changed much. I did full history actually. So full, that means like his pure history. So I do, there's a lot of history stuff to study, but it's also the same. It's source-based questions and structured questions as well. Okay, yeah. So that's for that. And yeah, okay. So the next one is with regards to inference, not very good. Should I still take history and social studies? So that's a good point. So to this point, right, I would say inference is very important for social source-based questions. Particularly when you look at those kind of questions where they say, what can you infer from this? What is this source trying to tell you? How useful is this? How reliable is it? I would say that if your skills is not as strong, I would say don't worry too much at this point yet, because I think you are still pretty young at this age. There is still room for you to grow into that. So certainly don't let that close off. So I would say that put that in context of how interested are you in the subject. I think that's what's more important because very practically speaking, I would say that you cannot get around that because social studies has to do that also. So you cannot escape that. So if you have to build up your skills for social studies, it will also help for history at the same time also. But I think the important part also is to understand um what's your interest level, right? Like, do you fall asleep when you study about history, right? For me, it was very clear cut. So I can tell you my thought process at that time. For me, last time when I look at history versus geography, uh, I really was really excited, right? When I think about World War II, when I think about rise of, you know, uh, Nazism, fall of Hitler, right? It really excites me. But when I think about geography, human geography, population, everything, it just bores me to sleep from my own perspective. So it was very clear cut for me that I would just want to do history because it's more interesting, right? So I think that's really one thought process. And the second thought process is okay. I was better at history in terms of my techniques and everything, definitely a lot better. But even if not, then you have to ask yourself, long. So if you look at geography now, are you better, right, in terms of your answering technique and everything? If not, if it's comparable, then I think look at it in terms of the interest area will be good, right? Okay. Yeah, so another question. So, okay, as I answer the questions, also just to let everybody know, this particular slide is more like our AY 2026 registration. So it has opened for the new year. And for those of you who are keen to check out our classes as you breach into Sec 3 and Sec 4, do feel free to click on our link here and then you can find out more, okay? Yeah, so you all can scan that while I take a look at the question. Yeah, so in terms of benefits of third lang for the L1, R4, I would say here also, number one is really dependent in terms of the proficiency of the students lah. So I think, in fact, I would say this is quite niche, uh, much more rare, and it also depends on whether you are somebody who is good at that. In fact, in all my years, I will feel that even amongst my peers and the students that we work with, there are very few that really survives that long in doing the third language. I myself actually I took third lang in Sec 1. I dropped it after a month because so I took Japanese and I never really got round to doing well at it. Even though I was not bad at English and Chinese, you know. Yeah, so I think it's really a matter of aptitude. But there are also people like I believe in the case of this student who has that attitude. So I also have friends who really caught on to Japanese and they did well throughout. So I would say the benefits of third lang extends beyond grade requirements actually. I would say that if it's something that serves you well, it really becomes your competitive advantage. Like the people whom I know who really did well in that third lang in secondary school, they went on to do great things with it in life. Like some of them, even things like Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they went there, and or even other areas, So exploring the culture. Some of them even like some of my friends, they went overseas to work in Japan. So I would say that if it is a competitive advantage for you, do explore and do build on it because it's very rare for somebody to be able to cultivate and identify that strength, particularly in third language at secondary school. It will serve you well. But for those of you who can't do it, also don't fret, because scientific studies have also shown that maybe you don't learn it well at secondary school, but it can be the case that at uni, let's say you become very motivated as an adult and you want to come back to learn it, you can actually learn it quite well. That's the interesting thing. In fact, they say that because as adults you are more motivated, you can learn it faster. So don't give up hope also about that. Okay, yeah. Okay, next question. Is it advisable if I take pure bio and history? Is it very content heavy? That definitely actually. So I would say that if you look at and I think that's a good thought. So if you look at things, is also thinking through not just in silo, not as standalone subjects, but how they mesh up and work together. And indeed, I would say that these two are quite content heavy. Definitely for bio. So bio is one of those subjects where I would say upfront, it's a lot of memory work actually. There's compared to say like physics and chemistry, bio is a lot of memory work. And how do you best optimize the amount of content that you have to memorize? And that never change, In fact, you go to JC, it's also a lot of memory work. Just that in secondary school, you memorize the parts of a cell, right? A cell, uh, less things to memorize. Then in JC, a lot more advanced things to memorize. So it really tests the content and to some extent your writing, because a lot of times, it's really how do you develop your response in a clear and coherent manner. So I would say to this student, it is true. So the answer to your question is yes, it is very content heavy. But should you take it? I think it depends on your own ability level. As in, are you the type of student who can memorize very well? Can memorize very well. So I can tell you a fact is myself, when I was in secondary school, I can memorize really, really well, right? And that was one of my strengths that I had. And if you were like that, I would say that it will serve you quite well. If you can memorize well and you can write well as well, then these will be two areas that you can thrive in. But again, you can see here there is always going to be what we call right, as a trade-off, right? So if you pick bio, and now if you're looking at it in terms of 8 subjects, it will mean that you probably are giving up something else, right? So you're either going to be giving up one of the other subjects, one of the other science, and here then we have to be careful, right? So which one is it? Because physics and chem, because ultimately if you look at it, just looking across, bio becomes one of those subjects that is typically not really linked as a prerequisite to anything. In fact, I've already shown you, right? Bio is not even needed for medicine. But physics and chem, you have to be careful because physics and chem, a lot of times are requisites for something. So you have to be very careful here that, so if you take bio and you are not looking at it as triple science, what do you give up? And does that affect, your future aspiration, right? So that's how I would think about it. Okay. Oh, history and geography, is it, which one is more content heavy? I would say that it depends. Yeah. And this one wise, right? So I would say that actually for the JC level, right, people always say geography is worse, right, compared to history. But at the secondary level, I would say that the divide, the divide between the two is not as significant. But at the JC level, it's quite well known, that a lot of people like to say that the geography part is more intense. But at the secondary level, I think that's something that we should check. You should check with your seniors as well. Because I would say for the geography part, objectively speaking, because I myself, I have not really done the geography as much. I won't be able to tell you like point by point, which one is really more intense. Okay, but I think that one, I think is worth a check with like your teachers and also your peers. Then you can take a closer look in terms of the actual intensity, like which one. Okay. 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 Any other questions for anybody? I think that's the main part, right? Yeah, I don't think there's any other question. I think I've answered everything in the chat. So I think, yeah, thanks very much everybody for attending for today's session. Yeah, I hope that it was beneficial to some extent for you all. And as you know, go into this period of school, not school, subject selection, do take into account some of these considerations. And yeah, right. And I wish you all the best for the subject selection process. And also do note, this is just one of the first of many milestones that you all have. As you all go on to Sec 4, as you all go on to post-secondary, there are going to be many more of these milestone exams that you have to clear also, right? So yeah, so do see it all as interlinked in that sense. You will see that a lot of the things that you do now, the actions that you take will become more and more interlinked and with more and more implications for down the road also. Okay, Ken? Yeah, so with that, I don't think there's any other questions. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming in today and staying beyond the time. So just want to wish everybody the best and do keep a lookout for all our events because we do have a lot more of this coming up along the year, right? And for those of you who are interested to find out more about A math, how do we bridge from Sec 2 math to Sec 3 math, for instance, we'll be happy to share more on that. So do join our Telegram groups, keep the requests coming, and we'll see how to cater for that too. Okay, Ken? So if there's nothing further, then that's all for today. And thanks everybody, and hope you all have a good weekend and a good week ahead. Okay? Yeah. So with that, we'll see everybody again. Goodbye.